So one thing we talked about in class was a little bit of layout and using Sketchup and layout to get scaled drawings. And what I wanted to make a quick video for you guys is how to move from Sketchup to layout into Illustrator. At this point, we haven't gone over Illustrator yet, so I wanted to kind of just give you a quick uh, reference video that you could go back to see the process, so we can maintain our vector line work and our raster shadows and transparency. And if you guys remember in class, we talked about a little bit about raster and vector. Vector is going to give me the really clean, sharp, crisp lines, and I can enlarge those to any size that I want, and it will maintain that clarity and it will maintain that crispness. Um, but with that, it will not let me have transparency or shadows. You can kind of see here some shadows and transparency. That will be allowed in a raster image. And the raster image will let me have transparency and shadows and materiality, as you've seen here, but it doesn't let me have the crisp lines, and I can only make it so large before it starts to get pixelated. You all have probably printed out an image at some point where it's become pixelated. That's because it has a set size that it can be sort of set to. And so what's great with layout is it lets you do a combination process where it can overlay the vector line work on top of a raster image. And when we get into Illustrator, you can use that and kind of break them apart and then start doing some line weights, which is really important for your guys' final, to have really great line weights, so you can stand back and look at your image and get some depth, and really read the image well. It's just like in 121 where you could use different pencil weights. This is essentially digitally, so it's a lot faster and it gives you a lot more control. And so one thing you can do is you can set up your different line weights and then print them all out. And if it's not heavy enough, kind of quickly go in, select the line, and make it heavier. It's something you can't really do by hand if you've already drawn too heavy. So this is a great way to combine some techniques you learned early on in architecture school, and lets you kind of use the digital tools as a way to kind of quickly produce drawings. And so what we'll do here is we've started out, we've used, we have the bridge house here. So this is an example of, we're just going to kind of do one quick process using this elevation. And you can see I have all my scenes set up here. And one thing I'm going to do, and so say I want to have a really clean white orthographic drawing that's fairly minimal. I'm not really worried about showing textures in this image. So I'm going to use a sort of white style and keep it clean and let my line weights do a lot of the work. And I might use some grays and blues and a little bit of color in Illustrator later on. But you have to sort of make a decision on what type of drawing you want to have. We'll do another segment about creating elevational drawings where you can have materiality, and you can have, we can use a little bit of Photoshop at that point where I could put in more of an abstract tree line background. I could have some textures overlaid. And we'll put another video up and we'll go over that in class on how to create those. It's a little bit separate of a process, but this one's really kind of just showing you how to get it into Illustrator if you want to use those white, sort of clean orthographic drawings that we've showed in class before. So one thing I'm going to do is I have this, and this is showing my textures and everything. I'm going to want to have this as like an all white style, but I still have the shadows on. So I'm going to make sure I have, kind of clicking on shadow settings here, I have my shadows where I want them. See, if I don't have shadows on, there's not really any depth, and that's what's going to give me the depth of some shadows. So play around with the shadows and make sure they're where you want them to be, where you're getting a little bit of reading of the form. And then one thing I'm also going to do here is up top, I think we've all brought out these views. We have this side views to set up, but there's also these other set of styles. There's styles here in the taskbar, but then there's also view styles here, which let you see like hidden line, texture through color, texture with actual material, which you can see the difference here. And then you can do X-ray if you wanted to do X-ray. I don't really need to do that, so I'm going to turn that one off. But what I want to do here is I'm going to use this hidden line style. And you can see it's going to hide all my texture here, but it's going to give me shadows and general form and line weight. And I'm going to go ahead and say View, Animation, and Add Scene. And we'll have that as Scene 18. If you don't have these up here, I think it's under View, Customize Toolbar, and you can drag them in. Just click and drag from there. I think on the PC it's a similar thing where it's View, Tool Palettes, and then you can get your different views and bring them up here. So I have my scene saved at scene 18. We'll just go ahead and leave it at scene 18 right now. And then I'm going to go ahead and say File and then Save. And I want to make sure that I save it because when I bring it into into Layout, it's going to need to have the latest version of the model. So it's going to want you to save anyways. So it's saved now. I'm going to do File, and then I'm going to scroll down here to the kind of midway down and say Send a Layout. And Layout brings in different page sizes, and you guys are going to be using 11 by 17s. You can make a decision if you want to use portrait or landscape. Generally, you're using landscape because most of the houses sort of have a longitudinal direction, and we want you to fill out your pages with elevations. So you're going to have to find the right sort of scale. So you can pick between either one of these. I'm going to just go ahead and go with landscape here and say choose, which is tabloid is 11 by 17. So we'll let that open up, and you can see Layout's already dropped this on the page for me. It's got the latest last saved SketchUp view. And one thing I want to do is, so this is looking good. I'm happy with this. It's, these bars here will let me kind of extend the viewport to what I want. But right now it's not really to a scale. It's just kind of dropped in the last image, and it might not even be the view that I want. So what I can do is I can right click right on that while this blue is highlighted, and I can say scenes, and you can see here, here's all my scenes I have in my model. And you remember, so I have north elevation was that one with the textures, right? And so if that's what I wanted to do, I could go ahead and use this one, but for this sake, I'm going to go ahead and use the white style one that I've set up. So I'm going to go to View. I'm going to right click on this and then go to Scenes. And I'm going to go Scene 18. And that's that white style that I've set up. It's totally fine if you want to use materials for your elevations. It's just a choice you have to make. But you can see this model, when it was created, it used a different texture than the SketchUp texture. And it's a nice wood panel. And so they're a little bit nicer than the regular SketchUp textures that come through. So this would work out well. Whereas those SketchUp textures you don't really want to use those. And you can spend the time in SketchUp creating textures, or this is something that we can do in Photoshop fairly quickly and fairly easily, and we'll cover a video, or we'll show how to do that in class as well. So we'll go ahead and just use the white one that I've set up right now. Plus, if we wanted to add textures, this is the base that we'd want to use in Photoshop. It gives me it's almost like a blank canvas in a sense, where I can start laying those textures on top. And so that post-process through Photoshop gives me a lot more control than just kind of exporting through SketchUp. So right now I have my view set up, but I'm not to a scale. So again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say scale, and you can see it says current scale. That's not really a scale that we want to use. And I want to find one that fills out the page correctly, and you can kind of go through these and see what's going to fit the best. You want to give yourself a little bit of breathing room on the sides, and you don't want it to be too small. So you want to go through and say, okay, 1/8 inch is good, but I'd like to get a little bit more kind of context in there. I'm going to go ahead and go to scale and try 1/16. That's a little bit small, and so it's like I have too much. I've done all this great modeling work here, so I don't want to have it too small on the page where I don't see anything. So I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to use the scale that's sort of in between those, which is this 1 inch equals 10 feet. And one thing I want to be conscious of is if I'm using that scale for this elevation drawing, I want to use that scale for all of my other orthographic drawings of the same family. So that means like my other elevations should all be the same scale. My section drawing, if I have one, that's sort of just a flat cut section, should be the same scale. My plan should be the same scale. Your site plan, it's more about context, so you'll be at a much smaller scale. So your building would be like this big and you'd have more site context. But generally the floor plans and elevations and even some sections, you want to make sure that all your scales are the same. You don't want to pin up and have all these different scales kind of happening across the page. So right here I have, it's to a scale and it's kind of fitting on the page well. So I'm pretty happy with that. One thing I want to do is over here on these sidebars here in layout is there's all these different sort of windows that I can look at. And we looked at like dropping trees in and that, everything from that. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to let Illustrator be the means for me to do all that stuff. But one thing I want to make sure I do is in the Sketchup Model tab, I want to come down here where it says raster. I want to change that to hybrid. And so what that will do is that it's going to give me that overlapping that I talked about of the raster and the vector image. If I just choose vector, you can see I don't get any transparency, all my shadows go away. But if I zoom in here, my lines are really, sharp. I don't have any pixelation happening. They're just these nice clean vector lines. If I just choose raster, you can see I'm going to get my shadows, I'm going to get everything. But if I zoom in here, you can see that pixelation that's happening on this slope here. Right, and that's not what we want. That's going to not look very good when we print it out, but I get these shadows, which there's a little bit of pixelation here, but that's okay on that. It's not a kind of determining line, and this transparency in the back. This is important. It's going to be kind of far enough away where that's okay. And I want to make sure I have this selected to pick these, right? So I have this blue box while I'm doing these. I'm going to pick hybrid. And so I have that set, and you can see I get some transparency, I get some shadows happening, I get my clean lines. It kind of blocks out a little bit of the view in the background, but that's okay. I mean, I'm pretty happy with the depth and the shadows. So, okay, I got this view all set up in this page. I'm going to go ahead and we could add all of our different elevations and create a whole page set here with north, south, east, west, and all of our views like we've done. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to have this one, and we're going to show you how to do it. And one thing you might want to do anyways is export them all individually, so you can open them up separately in Illustrator rather than trying to open up a multi-page PDF. You're going to have to break it out anyways. So with that said, what I can do now is I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Export, and I want to have this as PDF. And it might look a little bit different on a PC, but I want to make sure that under these options, and it might be like on a PC, it might show up these options anyways. First, I'm going to name this Bridge House like Elevation 1. I'm going to click on these options here, and I want to make sure that my output resolution is set to high. And I'm going to turn off this Use JPEG compression for images. It really shouldn't matter too much, but some people have had issues in the past where it won't open correctly in Illustrator, and I think that this is the problem. Hopefully it doesn't cause a problem in this video, but you can go ahead and turn this off, and I don't really need it to open up in a PDF viewer. So I'm going to hit OK, and so that's all. It's 1:1. Output resolution is high. I say OK. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and we're going to go ahead and hit Save. All right, and so I'm going to minimize this, minimize our model here, look to my desktop, and we have it right here, Bridge House, White Elevation 1. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to right click on this and say Open with Adobe Illustrator. And you can see it opens it up. Illustrator's got my 11:17 on a canvas, so it's sort of my working space in Illustrator. And we'll go over Illustrator more. This is just sort of a reference process for when we do go over Illustrator, you'll sort of know a little bit more about what the tools are. So you can see I have my image here. It's nice to set up on my 11:17, and I have almost kind of like you see in SketchUp layers, and layers are a lot more important in SketchUp and in Illustrator and Photoshop. They work a little bit differently from each other, even though they're both Adobe programs. And so what I can do here is you can see if I kind of just hover over top, I'm not clicking or anything, it gives me this blue box that's over top. And what I'm going to do is, you can see if I right click on this, if I click on this box here, you can see it brings up this box around the outside. That's my whole image. That's the sort of the combined image. That vector image and that raster image are sort of grouped in together as one. And so what I have to do is sort of unlock them and almost explode it like you do in SketchUp. So with that selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say release clipping mask. And so you should see it's going to highlight all of the line work, and it's going to highlight in the background here. And I know that it's worked because if I hover over this, and you can see that blue box shows up, and I click and drag, you can see that's my shadows and everything, and then here's my line work. So I don't really want to move that around like I've just done. I want to keep them all lined up. But what I want to do is I want to move one to a different layer so I can have control over line weights on one, and then I can have my transparency on another. So over here in Illustrator, and we'll go over Illustrator some more, you can see I only have one layer, which is everything here. And you can tell when things are on a layer by the color of when you select something. So blue, and there's this blue color here, right? If I change this color, let's see, I'm going to name this line work, or let's say base line work. And I'll change this to, let's just do green. You don't have to change the color, I'm just kind of showing you how you know you have something selected. So, okay, you can see now the selection, it's green. So it's just a little reference of what layers you're on here. So what I want to do is I want to create a new layer that I can move my shadows to and my transparency. So right down here, this little create new layer, folded corner, I'm going to click on that. I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to name it shadows. And say okay. And so now I'm going to kind of hover back over, and here's my shadow layer. I don't need to move it around, but I'm just showing you guys for this video. I'm going to click on that, and this little box next to base line work shows me that I have something. It says indicated select artwork. That means that I've picked something. So what I want to do is I want to click and drag that little green box up until it turns red and drop it there. That is essentially moving that thing that I've selected from one layer to another. And so now you can see all of a sudden my shadows have sort of come to the front of my image, and my line work is in the back, because in Illustrator, whatever layer is on top is the one that's kind of showing the most, or is in front in a way. So my base line work is behind, and my shadows are on top. I could simply sort of drag my base line work up top, and you can see I get this, I get all my line work happening back up again. But what I like to do is, because sometimes you'll have textures, sometimes this won't just be shadows, is I like to click this circle here, which selects everything that is on that layer. So everything that's on that select shadows layer, by clicking this little circle, it's different than the square. If I choose this circle, then I can come up here to transparency. I'm going to click on that. And then this is just sort of show up where it says normal, opacity 100%. I'm going to click on normal, and I'm going to change that to multiply. And what that does is it kind of creates transparency of that image without fading any of the actual line work or the actual raster image. So it lets things kind of bleed through without, when you just pick something and you change the transparency, it kind of lightens it a lot. Multiply allows a transparency without sort of lightening of the actual image. So it kind of lets things bleed through one another. And it's perfect for exactly what we want to do here. We want to see the shadows. We want to see the line weights. We want to sort of see everything without lightening up any of those actual shadows or that transparency. So you can see now I have a shadows layer, and I have my base line work layer. And what I'm going to do here right next to the eye, I'm going to lock them. and that doesn't let me move anything. You can see it kind of turns to this pan. It's saying you can't do anything. But I can make sure that I have things on the correct layer by clicking on this eye. So you can see I can turn off shadows, and here's just my line work, and I can turn that on and turn off my my line work, and you can see here's my shadows. Right, and so you can see I get the sort of vector or the raster image, but it's very small pixelation. But then if I turn on my line weights, you can see I still have that really crisp, clean line work. And Illustrator is a vector-based program, so it's going to let you edit vectors and make things that you could print to any size without losing the quality. Whereas Photoshop is raster-based, and we'll go over that in class a little bit more. But you can only create things so large, before if you print them out like double that size, they're going to become pixelated. So that's sort of one of the major differences between Illustrator and Photoshop. Is one's for altering photos and making like you've seen perspectives and things with color and photography and a lot of different materials. Whereas Illustrator, you can do that, but maybe you've all seen like people creating logos or these types of drawings that we're doing right here, or diagrams, or things that maybe aren't that you could make like any size. So like say like a logo, a lot of that is made in Illustrator, and you can do a lot in Illustrator, but it also allows you to create, say that logo, you could print it out on a banner and put it on the side of a building, and it would still look very clean. Versus if you try to do it in Photoshop, you'd have to create a very large image and have a very high resolution photo that you're using. Otherwise, it'd get sort of pixelated. So with this said, we have our elevation all set up, and one thing we're going to can start doing now is we can start adding some line work. And what I could do is sort of check the line weights that my building is currently at right now. And so if I unlock this base line work page, or this layer, I can click on a line here. And if stroke right here, that's actually, stroke is essentially means line and line weight. So I could see, and it says it's a 0.5 line weight. One thing I could do is I could go through and I could change all the line weights, say to, it gives me all the way 1 point, or if I wanted to make it even heavier. It gives me a lot of control over my line weights. But I don't really like doing that, because if I want to change wholesale a whole bunch of lines or like an outline, I have to go through and select every single line. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to go through and individually change all of those lines. I'm going to draw over top with various line weights that I would want. So this is all at 0.5. And what I want to do, and one thing you can do here is say you want your corners to be more square. There's different caps, round cap, projecting cap, or like a butt cap here, or different edge conditions. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make those all really sharp, and I'm going to change them all to 0.25. So everything is a little bit lighter, so I'm building my heavier line weights on top. So back down here to layers, I'm going to select everything. So you can see the difference in selection is if I click this, I get this little box. Right? And I could move that up and down to different layers. But if I click the circle, it selects everything on that layer. All the lines are selected. So with clicking in the circle, going back up to stroke, I'm going to change all of this to 0.25. And I'm going to click on, I want this corner to be sharp. And I'm going to do this projecting cap. So you can see I get you can see the difference changing here. Let's do this projecting cap. So now I have a light base of 0.25. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start creating line weight layers over top. And I'm not going to go over the whole image here, but I have one that I spent probably 10 minutes on that will open up and we can kind of look at. And as we go over Illustrator more, we can talk about. But this just gives you an idea to kind of get started. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this, let's say, ground line. And over here, on the side here, you can see there's fill and a stroke. One is essentially the color of your line, and one is color of the shape that you're making. So if I click on fill here, and I say red and black, and this pen tool, which we'll go over more in class, I click on this pen tool. Say if I click, 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 and then close off. If I zoom in here, you can see a red infill with a black stroke. If I click on that object and then click on this, change the color, change this to this color, and then I can also, just like we did before, change the stroke weight to something really heavy. You can see that's how you kind of get these fills, and you can, using a little swap, you can swap them here really quickly back and forth. So you can kind of start to get the idea of how it's really easy to do different line weights, and you can do these color fills. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my ground layer. I have everything else locked. I'm going to go ahead and say I don't want a fill right now, but I want a black line. And maybe I'm going to go ahead and start with 2 point. And using the pen tool gives you a little bit more control than the line segment tool. Line segment will let you draw those lines, but it kind of breaks it apart individually. Whereas the pen tool, it's almost like a polyline. It lets you kind of click and make segments out of the lines. And there's a lot you can do. You can draw curves and everything, which we'll go over more later on. But this is kind of nice because it lets me kind of lock into these anchor points because we have a vector drawing as one of our layers. So I'm going to click, click, and I can kind of click throughout those different points and just trace over top of my drawing. And one thing that I'm pushing while I'm moving around is if I have the pen tool selected and I hold space, it lets me kind of pan. And then Option, I believe it's Control on a PC, will let me zoom in and out. And so it just takes some practice to get used to using the different tools in combination with the space and the Option or Control key. So I'm clicking. I'm going to go ahead and go up here. That's topo. I'm going to go click this. And then we'll go ahead and finish out the page here. So you can see I have a ground line. It's a nice weight, but I have these lines happening underneath. I could go through and delete them, but one thing I'm going to do instead, and just so in case I want them later, that's sort of non-destructive, is I'm just going to go ahead and draw a fill over top, and then we can play around with color. So I'm going to say a new layer, ground fill, and we'll go ahead and lock this layer. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to switch these. I'm going to change this to a, maybe a light gray. And then I'm going to essentially use the pen tool again. Just hit P for pen tool, or come up here and select it. And I can follow that top tracing I just already made. And you can see it's trying to fill in, trying to follow as I click. Click there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down to the bottom of the page. And it's okay if you're beyond your white paper here, your kind of working space, because it won't print beyond that. You can set it up so you can kind of draw beyond the lines. So you want to make sure you don't have any weird slivers of white or anything happening. So you can see now, okay, now I have my ground fill, but my ground plane line is getting a little bit lost. So what I can do is just drag that layer underneath ground line, and you can see I get a nice solid fill ground plane. What I can do now is I can select this and I can change the color. And since it's the only thing on the layer, I'm going to go ahead and use a circle to select it. And then I can lighten it up a little bit. You can see. And why I use the circle is, say I create a square on this shape or on this layer. If I click on this and then change the color, it will only change that individual object, which maybe that's what you want to do. But if I want to change everything on a layer, I select this, and then I change the color. You can see it changes everything on that layer. So you just kind of have to know what do you want to change. And the way that I like to do my when we get into line weights here is I like to create different like line weight, like we had the ground line, ground fill line. I'll create a new one saying heavy. And I hate yellow. It's hard to see, so I'm going to change this to gold or something. And so what I'm going to do now, change this to black. And I can see, I can try to figure out what is closest to me in the foreground is going to be the heaviest. So I'm going to trace around these. And if I hold shift, it kind of locks orthogonally, like locks into 45s or 90 degrees. I believe that this comes up to, let's go up to this top one here. Actually, let's go to there. I'm just holding shift and kind of clicking around. And so what I can do now, as you can see, I can select this everything, and I can easily go to stroke, and I could change that to 2. Maybe that's too heavy or not heavy enough. I can click that off and say stroke 1.5. And so I can work my way around, and I can create new layers here. So I might do like a mid. And you can create as many layers as you want. I'm going to go ahead and lock this one so I can kind of just keep working on separate layers. And I'll go ahead and I'll start drawing this shape outline here. Kind of moving my way back. And to get out of the pen tool, you can kind of just hit escape, and then it will stop, and then I can push P again and start again. And I'm just holding shift, hitting escape. And you can see. So I have these two that are kind of pretty close in weight. So I might select this one, go to stroke. Let's put that at 1. And then go back to my layers here. Let's lock that, unlock the heavy stroke. Let's put that at 2. So now you can start to see how I can work through and do a bunch of layers where I might now do light. And obviously maybe these all different, but I'm getting I have an idea of what I want them to be. I might on this one do a little bit lighter, and I can use the square here because it's pretty quick. Just for the shape and switch those so it's a stroke. So let's just say I have those two. I'm going to change that to maybe a 0.5. You can see I get a 0.5 there. Gives me a little bit of depth. But it's quick to go through. I can print this out and I can say, okay, these aren't heavy enough or these are light enough. I can just select all my lines on my various layers here, and I can quickly change if I need to up the depth of things so they read better. Another thing you can do is I can start to use fill colors and multiply like we did here. So maybe this is a concrete piece. So let's make a new layer called okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this a kind of light gray. And one thing I'm going to do before I even start drawing, I am going to hide this. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this multiply so I can see what I'm drawing first. So I'm going to select this whole layer, go to transparency, and change it to multiply. And so as I'm drawing, it will let me see kind of what's happening behind. So you can see, I can see that door frame now. Versus if I left it on normal, it would just be a solid fill, and it might be hard to know what points to click on. So you can see now I have this concrete fill, and maybe if that's too heavy, I can either change the color, or I can select everything and play with opacity as well. Kind of just lighten things up a little bit. So you have a lot of control over colors, opacity, multiply, line weights, all kinds of things. And one thing that I didn't mention that I did here, which I think is kind of before you get all the way this far, is in this view you can see I created this little line, and that is a line that is 6 foot tall. And so what that lets me do is when I come in here, I know that this is the size a person should be. So when I start dropping people in here, little silhouettes or whatever, I can use this as a measurement tool, because roughly 6 feet is kind of just the accepted size you use for people, and it helps give a sense of scale. So I can drop all my people in here, and then I can kind of quickly, once I'm done, unlock my base layer here and just delete that line. But I know that I'm dropping people in at the right size. So you can see this is kind of just a quick start to Linework, and kind of color fills, and you can drop in, put a link up for a website that lets you download a bunch of vector-based, all silhouettes. You can download trees. We can search here. You can see people. Some of you have probably seen this in your studios before, but you can download these people files. You just come scroll down and say download. But it's a lot of vector-based things. So if I actually have one, let's see, common people, you can see it gives me all these people that I could make this guy like 100 feet tall and he'd still be super clean lines. So what I can do now is I'm going to create a layer for people. I'm going to click and kind of just drag this guy into here. Say yes, drop some on people layer, and I can use my reference line. Bring him into here. I get this little box around. Holding shift will let me scale proportionally. I'm going to bring him up to that point there. And he's roughly at the right size. So he, maybe I'll make him a little bit taller. But now I have a person in there. And one thing I can do is I can set this layer of people to, I can bring the opacity down, because maybe I don't want multiply, maybe I don't want to, maybe I want to eventually hide them behind this rail. So I'll just kind of bring the opacity down, and I can kind of drag him around. There's right. So now I have a person in there. I can do the same thing. There's trees. There's all kinds of stuff. If I want to do this vector-based, kind of clean line drawing. And one thing I might want to do is add in some texture here, since there's a bunch of lines. And we can go over more about how that's done. But essentially, if I create a wood fill, and we'll go over more on how to cut things out in Illustrator in class. But if I go into, I have a swatches layer here, and swatches are like little color palettes. I can come down here, swatch libraries menu, and patterns, basic graphic, basic lines. It opens up this, and you can see I get these lines. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that one. And then what I can do is object, transform, scale. And I want to make sure that I have objects turned off, because you can see it's going to scale the object. I just want to scale the pattern. So maybe I make that, 25. You can see what that does. It gives me the wood panel. Say OK, object, transform, rotate. Same thing. I want to make sure that I don't have objects on. You can see what that does. Say OK. And I might go through and trace this. I can leave this up here as a reference. I'm just going to do this quickly. As you can see, I can start to get this. If for some reason, say this is coming in and it's like a different color. Say it's coming in black, but I want it to be this eyedropper tool here. When I have this selected, I can choose eyedropper, and then I can click on my reference. And then if I wanted to cut out these windows, I can make a square on that same layer. And I'm going to use that as a kind of means to cut something out. So I'm going to select this. And you can see I have these two happening. So I want to cut, I don't want to have this wood showing up on this. I'm going to go through, I'm going to go up here to Window, and I'm going to go to Pathfinder. And I'm going to select this, and I'm going to select this. By holding Shift, I can select both. Clicking Shift, click this. And I'm going to choose this Exclude. I click that, this one right here, and you can see it cuts that window out. I can go ahead and do that again. And I have this selected and my window selected, and hit Exclude. And I can kind of work my way through and do all of the windows. So that, again, that's Window, Pathfinder, and that's just the Exclude one here. And if that wood texture is coming in too heavy, again, you've seen, click on this wood here, and I can change transparency. I can bring it down maybe to like 70 or 65 or whatever. So you can see how I can work my way through and get some textures and some nice fill. I have some people in here. Delete this person. I'll open up one here that it took me 10 minutes to kind of just do this. Let's see, Bridge House. This is it right here. So this is one, this is kind of same process all the way through. Let's close these. Ground fill. I have all my layers, trees, concrete, boards, people, light, mid, heavy. I drop some trees in here, use a transparency. I'd want to ultimately go in and do a little bit more line work. And maybe, I want to start to bring in a tiny bit of color. So I might, do a really light blue on the windows, just to see what it looks like. Might not be the right thing. Make sure I have everything locked. Otherwise it tries to. And you can see I don't want this heavy stroke on here, so I'm going to go ahead and click, and then I click on the stroke, and I'm going to turn that off. And I want to set this to multiply. I can sort of just copy this over. I'm moving, I ultimately would want to go through and refine all these to be inside those mullions, but for the sake of the video. Maybe that's what I want to do. I could kind of go through and highlight all of these. I think that looks pretty nice, just to hit what's glass. And I think with this image, it's probably pretty useful because I have glass here and here, and I have glass railings, but this is open. So a little bit of color pop, I think is pretty nice. Again, too, is one thing you don't have to do is you don't have to have your ground fill be a color. So I could click on this, and I could change this to white. So I could just have it be really, really like clean drawn. And you can see, so I'm not going to go through every step of this, but I have done, the concrete, the line weights, dropping some trees and some people in there. I still have this line for reference. But all in all, once you kind of get the hang of the tools, you can go through all of your plans and elevations and everything and get some really nice, clean orthographic drawings. We can talk about how to bring some material in as well. But if you've done those SketchUp materials, if you've kind of created nice materials like the ones we saw, those would show up pretty nicely in here, and you can adjust the opacity of those and bring them down and really make your line weights pop. And one thing I want both Corey and I want you to do for this class is have really nice clean line weights. So you print them out and put them up on the wall and they pop and you can see. Because as you can tell, it's really quick to come back into your Illustrator file and completely change a whole line weight just by kind of going here and saying, okay, I'm going to make this 8. Way too heavy, right? I can easily change it back and forth. So there shouldn't be any reason to not do this. Illustrator is a super useful tool, and we'll get into more than just elevations. We'll get into some diagramming and how you can use it. It's essentially same tools: pen, stroke, fill, transparency, multiply, and how you use your base SketchUp geometry to sort of create those. But hopefully this is helpful for you guys. You can kind of rewind and see the process again of how to like bring it in from SketchUp to Illustrator using that layout in a hybrid mode. So let me or Corey know if you have any questions. And again, we'll go over some more Illustrator in class. Hopefully this is helpful.